So we hear a lot about global warming. We talk a lot about global warming. I write about global warming. We're going to talk about cooling, which is a different lens through which to address the same problem. It looks like we're on course to break our record for the year for the number of locations in the world that have hit 127 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. We have urgent needs of expanding access to cooling, which is not just air conditioning, as you both know, in developing countries and elsewhere. So I want to just get from both of you your thoughts on how urgent this problem is and how, if we don't get this right, expanding access to cooling, we could potentially undo a lot of the gains that we have been making in energy efficiency and cutting CO2 emissions so far. Let's start with you, Rachel.
Hi, well, it's great to be here again, and this time talking about cooling. So following on from what Zia just said, feels okay in here at the moment, right? Not too hot. You would have presumably had something for breakfast this morning, which hadn't gone off, because at some point it was presumably refrigerated. And most of you are up to date with your shots, yeah? So that vaccine was refrigerated as well. So we take cooling of ambient air temperature for granted. We take the cold chain for medicines for granted. We take the cold chain for food for granted. Today we waste a lot of food. We have 2 million preventable deaths a year from lack of access to cooled vaccines. And we have hundreds of millions of people living in growing cities in the developing world which are getting hotter and hotter. And we don't, in a country like the United States or in Europe, provide affordable ambient cooling, a decent temperature at home or at work or in other public spaces for many people on low income. So as the population grows, as the world gets hotter, and as we try to bring energy demand down, because energy is a big driver of the energy system today, is a big driver of climate change, we've got to do all of this in such a way as to be able to provide efficient cooling for more and more people. I'm going to let Kyte talk about the other bit, which is related to the chemicals that we use in cooling, because she and many others played a very important role in what we call the Kigali Amendment.
Okay, so in addition to, good morning, good afternoon, I have no idea what time zone I'm on actually. In addition to the energy consumption of cooling, the actual chemicals that are used in fridges, in air conditioning units, whether it's mobile air conditioning in your car or room AC in your home, but also in things like building foams for insulation and a bunch of other applications, are what are called F-gases. So some of you may be old enough to remember when the ozone layer was the big environmental crisis. In fact, that's what got me into being an environmentalist at the age of 12, in fact, was the ozone crisis. And what has happened is that through the success of that treaty, the Montreal Protocol, successive chemicals have been replacing the original ozone depleters. And it just so happens that all of those gases also contribute to global warming. And in fact, their power per molecule is thousands of times stronger than CO2 in terms of its effect on the atmosphere. And successive treaties have replaced ozone-depleting substances with other chemicals, and now CFCs and HCFCs are being replaced with HFCs, which have huge global warming potential. So what happened in the run-up to the Paris Agreement was that we started to negotiate as a global community a treaty to phase down the use of HFCs, and actually for many countries actually leapfrog from ozone depleting chemicals to completely different chemicals that wouldn't even require using HFCs. And it sounds really boring, and I can see people slightly drifting off, but actually this is about getting one of the 6 greenhouse gases completely out of the atmosphere, and it's the easiest one to tackle because it's a man man-made chemical, and it just means fitting these gadgets with a different chemical. It's super easy. And the big chemical companies that make the pollutants also make the solutions. So we don't have the same horrendous vested interest problem that we do around things like fossil fuels. So it should be easy. That being said, it did require an awful lot of work to get this amendment to the Montreal Protocol negotiated. But there was a universal acceptance on the 15th of October 2015. Countries got together to agree to an 80% reduction over 30 years of these chemicals. So rich countries are going to start the freeze date is 2019. For China, Brazil, Africa, Latin America, it's 2024. And then there are a group of laggard countries, India and the Gulf states, and their freeze date is 2028. But as the market moves to replace these chemicals, all of those countries will end up moving faster. And that's the great thing about the Montreal Protocol Treaty. Countries actually overachieve that treaty. Every time they agree to a new commitment, they actually do better. So it's one of the great positive stories about climate change. It was one of the wonderful things that happened in the same year as Paris. And only 20 countries need to ratify in order for it to enter into force. Mali, an African country, was the first country to ratify this year. So it's the 30th anniversary of the Montreal Protocol this year. Most people won't even notice it happening, but it is the world's most successful environmental treaty, and it's getting rid of one of 6 greenhouse gases completely.
And what is the temperature impact of just the Kigali Amendment itself in terms of cutting those HFCs by the amount that it is?
So just the HFCs is 1/2 degree of warming to be avoided. And if you add the energy efficiency benefit, because every time you switch out the coolant, the engineers will change the compressor and a whole bunch of other things in the air conditioning, and they always get a hit in terms of energy efficiency. So if you add both of those together, it could be up to a whole degree of warming. And if you think about where we are now, we're experiencing 1 degree of warming. And if you look at the extreme weather events around the world, 1 degree of warming is really significant, and it's non-linear. So if we can avoid 1 degree of warming just through air conditioning, you can see how very important this is.
So I think the Kigali Amendment was huge. Nobody paid attention to it in the United States, partly because the negotiations were happening in Rwanda, which made it difficult for people like me to cover it. But it was probably it has the most immediate impact, even more so than the Paris Agreement, depending on the course that takes. What barriers are we looking at to enact the agenda that you're working towards, at sustainable energy for all, and that we're looking at in terms of expanding countries' availability of cooling? Like looking at a country like India, for example, where this is a huge challenge. What are the barriers in terms of finance, governance, NGOs, not having the United States really contributing much at the government level right now?
Well, I think the first challenge is just understanding that this is the magnitude of the potential, if we get this right, that we could do this right quite quickly, and speed is of the essence, right? I mean, the one thing we don't have in the fight for climate change or the fight against poverty is time. And if you understand that switching out different chemicals within refrigeration and within air conditioning, building or setting goals for and setting competitions for that super efficient, really cheap refrigerator that runs itself on almost no energy at all and doesn't pollute the planet at the same time, that's a manufacturing and marketing opportunity for companies around the world. And most of that's going to be met by companies from India, from Korea, from China, from new manufacturing centers in Ethiopia and Mexico and whatever. And that's the opportunity for the United States to stay engaged in the international community, because nobody does it better when we bring long-term research and development, academic skills, entrepreneurial ability, and finance together. So think of the trillions of dollars that can be made from not leaving anybody behind, letting everybody get access to cool medicine, cool food, and to live comfortably in warming cities. Think of that as a massive opportunity. And for those of you in the room, this is where that engineering degree needs to get applied. These are real-term global problems with solutions that we need in the next 5 to 10 years.
And around, I mean, if you think about, I mean, at the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, we fund a lot of work on this, but we also fund a lot of work on air quality and replacing coal with renewables in our environmental portfolio. And actually, if we can do best-in-class super efficient air conditioning in the countries that are growing their use of cooling, you could actually avoid the construction of over 1,000, possibly as many as 1,500 peak power plants over the next couple of decades. And in many of these countries, that's going to be coal. In most major cities in developing countries, cooling is 40 to 60% of peak power. So when there are blackouts in Delhi or Sao Paulo, it's because everyone's switched on their AC. And if we can do this in a much better way, think of the benefits in terms of slowing down people piling on coal, and when it comes to those who are off the grid, how much cheaper is it going to be for them to access clean, renewable energy if they have a fraction of the power demand for those appliances? So we need to make sure that the poorest also get access to this technology because it will bring down their overall energy bills and allow them to apply their time and their money to other things.
Awesome. You want to offer any final thoughts? Because the clock seems to have gone red, and I have no idea how long we've been up here. So,
yeah, well, I just think that, you know, more 5,000 people every month move into a city in Africa or Asia. Right? And that's where the population is growing, that's where population is concentrating, that's where services have to be delivered. And if we're going to build massive refrigerators in order to be able to live in ovens, we have to rethink everything that makes it possible to live in those temperatures. So it goes to building design, et cetera, and there's going to have to be the use of chemicals, and we're going to need to use energy to cool the way that the places in which we are going to gather as people. There has to be creative, disruptive solutions to that problem at scale and quickly, because otherwise there is no possibility of building peaceful, sustainable futures for those growing young populations in those cities. So just think about what it feels like in a city here with, when the brownouts come. This isn't just a problem for those growing cities. This is also a problem for us. So super efficient ways in which to cool our lives, our medicines, and our food. This is urgent. It's solvable. And with a lot of pressure from you and a lot of design from you, a lot of finance going into this area, we can fix this in the next 5 to 10 years. We can take that 1 degree off the table, and it gives us more time to be creative about the things which are more difficult, which are carbon dioxide and other parts of the energy system.
So from a political activism point of view, as citizens, write to your members of parliament, write to your environment minister, get them to ratify the Kigali Amendment. We need 20 countries. Let's get that done now. And I just want to say to those Americans listening, the former administration, the Kerry administration, Kerry's work and Obama's work was absolutely crucial in securing the Kigali Amendment. Obama put this issue on one of his first meetings with Xi Jinping along with North Korea. That's real leadership. John Kerry was personally involved in getting the Kigali deal. So actually, real leadership shown by the United States can be transformative. And for those of you from around the world, African leadership has been absolutely superb on this issue. The leadership of small island states and vulnerable countries, China has been exceptionally committed to this agenda. So wherever you are in the world, you need to keep up the political pressure. Let's get this amendment agreed and implemented. And it's the easiest thing in the world to do. It's not as complicated as all the other stuff. It's a good job story. It's a good growth story. It's a good air quality story. It's a no-brainer.
Awesome. Thank you very much, both of you.